6:30, and I'd like to call the meeting to order on Monday, October 28th, 2013. If we could all stand and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Stacy, would you confirm the notice of posting?
Yep, postings were in all appropriate locations, including the SAU office, our website, all the schools, and they were sent to the town offices.
Okay, thank you. This evening, we do not have a non-public scheduled. I don't anticipate that one will be scheduled at our agenda modification item. A couple of quick announcements up front, if I could take the liberty. Don Franklin is excused from the meeting this evening, but he will be joining us following tonight's meeting in a collective bargaining agreement strategy session, which we will hold via Skype. He'll be joining us. That will have no minutes. It's not considered a legal school board meeting that would otherwise require minutes. Our own Earl Mills of Newfound Regional High School will be inducted into the New Hampshire Interscholastic Athletic Association Hall of Fame in Concord on Sunday, November 17th. And Mr. Cochran is holding a reception here in Mr. Mills' honor from 5 to 7 p.m. that same day, which is open to all. So if you'd be interested in attending, congratulations to Mr. Mills for sure. We do have permission from producer Jay Childs to air his award-winning documentary, which uses a link to his website. There'll be a link on our website and a link to the Town of Bristol's media page. And it will also be shown on Channel 24 at various times, and that will start tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. We anticipate that'll be done at least 3 times a week. This was as a result of the board vote a couple weeks ago on October 15th to provide the district with this information. I anticipate that this will be available via the web links that I mentioned, hopefully by Wednesday, Stacy, at the latest, perhaps.
Should be.
I know Ray has provided Sue with the video, so it's just a matter of getting it up on the website. And perhaps related to this is on November 25th, I believe it is, we have a planned meeting for the superintendent to make a recommendation regarding the K through 8 stuff that we had studied this past year. Does anyone else have any other announcements here at the beginning of the meeting?
Did you say K through 8 or K through 12? It says on the...
Well, the K through 8 study is just something that's...
I don't know, it says K through 12 here, so...
Yeah, that's probably what it should be considered. Those are the announcements that I had. If anybody else has anything you'd like to make up front, just doing things a little bit out of sequence tonight. We are going to try to do the collective bargaining agreement meeting at your request, ladies.
I heard that.
Okay, that brings us to item 4, approval or modification of the agenda. Is there any request to modify, add to, or delete from the agenda? Okay, hearing none, I'll assume it's approved as submitted. We're now at item 5, intercommunications. I would ask all attendees at tonight's meeting to please sign in, print your name and town, and return those to the clerk at the end of the meeting for recording for attendance. For anyone that would like to receive a regular school board packet that we all get in the mail, emailed to us, if you just send your email address to scross@sau4.org, you can get on the distribution list. That now brings us to public comment, which is not limited to items on the agenda. I see we have elected officials in the audience this evening. Is there any commentary desired from any elected official?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but not at this time.
Okay. Good to see you, Skip. And hearing none, is there anyone from the member of the public that would like to speak? Okay. Mimi, that brings us to you. Do you have anything to share with us as our faculty liaison?
No, nobody's brought me any questions or issues at this point.
Okay. Tracy Keegan is not here this evening. He's our student council liaison.
And he did tell me that he was not able to attend tonight, so.
Okay.
And it's Keegan Tracy, not Tracy Keegan. Keegan Tracy. Keegan's the first name.
Yep.
Keegan Tracy, I'm sorry, we have that on there backwards.
Yep.
We need to fix that. Thank you, Ian. Okay, that brings us to item 6, which is the discussion for this evening, which is the budget, FY15 budget. Turn that over to you, Stacey.
Yep, so Mike and Ann and I, up to, again, this afternoon, have been meeting, and I will say one of the interesting things about having 3 brand-new SAU administrators is it really gives us an opportunity to dive in, and, you know, we keep asking, well, what are we missing? What did we forget? Where are we adding, subtracting? And so, Mike is gonna staple them together. I have actually not seen the bottom line since we readjusted today, but what I wanted to do is just kind of go over some of the changes that we made since the last meeting, so you know what the differences are. So we included an additional reduction of 1 para here at the high school. We included all of the retirement costs. As of today, I have 4 retirements for a total of $52,000, so that was an increase. The admin benefits, if you remember at the last meeting, there was that $88,000. That was a minus. We couldn't figure out what that was. So admin benefits were not included in last month's, in the budget you received last time, so those have been included. We reduced special ed tuition by $53,000. Health insurance, we actually received our guaranteed maximum rates from LGC, or actually Health Trust now. We had budgeted 7.3% as an average, which was our average over the last 5 years. Our increase is actually 9.6%, so we adjusted to make that change. There was a $12,000 increase in special ed tuition. That was for a regular ed student that was part of a settlement agreement that we just realized was there, so we added that in. That was something that was done before our time. Let's see, there were some small school psychology travel and school psychology tests were increased by a total of $2,000. We hired 1 in-house person, and we're looking to hire another in-house person next year, so there's some travel costs with that. But also the need to then purchase the assessment instruments for the school psychologists. So if we contract it, they bring their own tests, but if we have them in-house, we have to have the tests available for them. So that would allow us to purchase some of those. We had to add $35,000 for transportation for the after-school program grant. That was part of the grant writing process that in order for the district to continue to demonstrate that we are going to pick up the cost for the grant at some point in time. That was our share this year of paying for the transportation. So that was a total of $35,000 we had to add. Workers' comp had an increase of 14.73%, so we had to increase those lines. And property liability, we had an increase of 6.1%, so we had to increase those.
These are both over last year's budget?
Correct. Those are the big increases that we found within the budget. And as
What
soon
was
as-
the net dollar values for the health, workman's comp, and liability?
I don't have those at this moment.
It's gonna be tough to say because we also eliminated almost 19 positions. So the overall cost of health insurance, which you're gonna see, is not up as significant as it would be if we went to a default budget, which would fund it exactly as is. So you'll see that in a minute.
Our copy machine also broke, so we had to print them out. And
You can pass this. Thank you.
yeah. So if you look at the total amounts, the end result is with all those changes, we are approximately $2,503 under the current year's budget.
So if you want to look specifically at health insurance, which is object code 211, it would be the first page of the second report, which is report number 4, budget report by object. And you can see health insurance straight across. It's $291,000 increase across just the total general fund. Now, also, what I didn't factor into this is I met with Health Trust today to review the rate increases, and they presented us with, it looks like we will be able to reduce that number by about $126,000 for another premium, health premium reimbursement. So we received one this year. It's about $116,000. So next year we'll also, and you're probably going to start seeing these almost annually, because what that whole case really did was eliminate the ability of these insurance pools to stabilize rates. So what they did was they had, in easy to understand terms, I guess, set up, put money aside so that the rate increase each year would be relatively small. So they would apply that, whatever they charge for premiums, as it was reduced each year, so either we went up or down on that, they would save a pool of funds available, and now they have to give that back to you, or raise the rates for the next year. So we'll be able to reduce the $291 by $126,000.
So other than those changes, everything else in the budget pretty much stayed the same.
What was the big increase on the special programs? Did I miss that? Second line.
Decrease.
It was gonna be
That's a
186, and now it's 290.
It's a decrease.
You're right.
290,000.
I did have it outlined for a decrease. I was wondering how we had such a big decrease. I meant to say.
Isn't that from bringing stuff in-house?
Yeah, which line are you looking at?
It would be the
On
second
first
line
page?
on the paper, on the special programs. You
It's
get
really-
a $290,000 decrease. I don't complain about decreases, but I was wondering where it all came from.
Came from looking at positions that are necessary, trying to bring employees instead of contracted services, really kind of looking at the out-of-district placements and what's absolutely necessary for next year versus what we do.
I have 2 questions on page 1 of the second report, the report 4. The second line, after-school salary savings, 45,700. What does that come from? Is that from the grant picking up more, or?
Can you give me a line?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't have page 1, so now I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
catching up. So is it the two budget report or the 4 budget report?
4.
I can answer that for you. It's actually a direct transfer of funds from 110, which
Oh,
these actually supposed to be coded under object code 112. So if you look down just a little bit further, you can see it's 47,732, an increase.
Oh,
The
okay.
exact dollar amount.
Okay.
So you often want to keep things in the object codes they've been in, but when you're doing some massive changes, like we pulled the summer programs out of what you would consider a special programs function, it's just going to be cleaner for state reporting. So you're going to see a couple odd shifts like this, but that's just for reporting purposes.
Okay. My second question is on the next page, about halfway down, there's a repairs and maintenance saving, 16,912. What is that? Because we budgeted for something big last year, or?
We have, trying to think specifically, because this is across all functions.
Because I know we budgeted for these posts and they were very expensive.
Yes,
Yeah.
so there's been a change, so there's been some increase in repairs and maintenance and technology, which if we run a similar report, and I broke it out by function, which I'd be happy to do for you, there's a couple other reports we looked at today that I think would be helpful to look at without seeing thousands of accounts. But in general, we made it through a lot of different maintenance repairs. However, the big cost in the maintenance function of 2600 is actually the replacement of an oil tank, which we can talk about a little bit tonight, and meeting some district regulations which are coming through in 2015. That's a capital expenditure, that's not a replace or repair.
Yeah.
So it's really a transfer of cost. You're gonna see in new equipment increases. So in that repairing different items within the facilities budget, those have definitely decreased.
Okay.
But we have a much larger capital expenditure coming up.
Does any of that come out of, and I don't know about this, but don't we every year vote to put money aside for capital expenditures?
I don't think you have, I don't see that you have, you do vote on a capital, what looks to me like a capital improvement program, CIP. That's not necessarily putting the money aside. If you put the money aside, you'd be transferring out to like a capital reserve. One of the things I'll probably suggest as meetings go on is that you might want to create some capital reserves for very specific expenditures. Which will, and I'll give you an example where cities do this all the time. They budget for 1.2 police cars a year, but they don't replace that many, right? So every 3 years, they'll replace 3 cruisers.
Yeah.
But they don't want every 3 years to get this giant spike
Right.
in their budget.
Right.
So what they do is they put some aside into a capital reserve for that expenditure every year, so your budget is somewhat even.
And I think in the past you've had that on a warrant article. I don't know if it's
Well,
passed or
we're
not.
talking about the maintenance.
Yeah, you have about I think there's about $60,000 in that
I
fund.
know we're talking maintenance, but an oil tank,
You don't have anywhere near enough for $110,000.
Yeah, but the board could certainly look to say, you're gonna take that 60,000 and put it towards
Right.
that.
Well, we
Absolutely.
did vote that, I think, this past March. We usually try to when there's a surplus.
To vote,
Surplus funding. Didn't we vote for that?
Voted to take out 60,000 from maintenance, I mean, to set aside
Yeah.
for maintenance, right?
So that must
But
be where
not
the 60,000
specifically what to do with it.
But we did take the vote.
I'm pretty sure that the vote was to do that. I'm
Right,
not
so there-
positive.
which brings me
I
to the following
wasn't here,
question.
don't know.
So that 60,000 has been set aside and encumbered.
Not encumbered.
It's been set aside?
You set that aside in a trust account,
Okay, but it
which is
does,
not in your general fund.
but it does exist.
It does exist,
Okay.
yep.
And the total amount of,
The 110,000 for the oil tank project at the elementary school and middle school. You could vote, I couldn't put that in the budget.
hold on, I got a question. The total amount for FY15 proposed is 20,380,288. Right? So we have the 60,000 in the trust account, and then we have the 350,000 in reserve, in
Correct.
addition to this proposed.
In
money.
fund balance.
Okay,
Yes.
in fund balance, okay.
Yeah.
So So there's 410,000 set aside, if you will.
And the 350 takes a special meeting to spend, right?
No,
No.
it takes a request to the Commissioner of Education, as it turns out, if that request is approved by our Budget Committee.
Okay.
So there's no hearing required, which was what we were originally advised.
I'm pretty sure our warrant article explained that there had to be a hearing.
It turns out that municipal RSA 3211 explains how you can spend that money. And the warrant article didn't reference a hearing.
Oh, okay.
It said, shall we adopt provisions of 198-4B2 and authorize indefinitely until specific rescission the school district to retain year-end unassigned general funds in an amount not to exceed in any fiscal year 2.5% of the current year's net assessment pursuant to 198.5 for the purpose of having funds on hand to use as a revenue source for emergency expenditures and over expenditures under RSA 3211, or to be used as a revenue source to reduce the tax rate. And that passed. And in 3211, it describes how you can actually get to that fund, those funds. And when there is a budget committee in place, you have to submit the request to the budget committee for their approval to elicit permission from a commissioner.
But the 60,000 is under our,
That's separate,
Yeah.
and that's earmarked for building maintenance, I believe.
And would they consider that an emergency if it wasn't something we had to do right now or within the next couple of months? What are the list of emergency expenditures, I'm thinking?
Well, that's with the vagaries of what you would deem appropriate to ask the commissioner through the approval of the budget committee to spend the money for. And it's pretty vague, so what you consider to be an emergency, I guess,
Discretionary.
is gonna be discretionary.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but the funds, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but the funds in the $60,000 building maintenance are earmarked just for that purpose.
Well, that's an interesting question, because I just talked to the Department of Revenue about that, because it would appear that that was built in a trust. However, there was never appointed any trustees. It was the idea that it was supposed to fall, and this was an audit finding, I believe, and well, no, it wasn't an audit finding. The Department of Revenue made me just adjust the DOE 25 and MS 25, which are the financials that go to both the Department of Education and the Department of Revenue in New Hampshire. They are requiring us to, which is something that essentially the town of Bristol would have to vote on, to have trustees of the trust from the town of Bristol to take over that account technically, because of the way it was set up.
Why Bristol? Because the SAU is there?
I think so.
Yeah,
And
it's
they
in-
have
yeah.
a trustees, they have trustees already, and I don't think the DRA would care what municipality would take that
Because
over.
all the municipalities have trustees.
Yeah, when Dan was here, it was something we were trying to wrap up in the sense of, when we found out it was just sitting in an account, I said, I think it has to go into a reserve fund with the trustees. So he called the trustees and nobody had heard of it. So we just kind of assumed it was Bristol. Come to find out, it should have been in the warrant article as to which towns trustees should have been given that money.
Or, when creating the fund, name the school board as agents.
No, that's just to spend. As agents is just to spend it. But I think the trustees have to hold it.
I understand that. But I didn't know it was just building maintenance. I thought it was capital reserve. I know originally it came out of a new gym floor near the middle school with a leak, and that's, I'm pretty sure, where it began, so that we didn't end up in that situation again. It seems to me oil tanks would be And appropriate use of capital
I
reserve
believe
funds.
it's absolutely what it would be, and it's unique. This wasn't really set up as a capital, specifically a capital reserve. It's set up as a type of trust. And
Yeah.
I believe I captured some of the minutes from the,
I think originally our
Meeting.
warrant articles said capital reserve, but
I can,
could be
There's
wrong.
been a
It's been
couple,
a long
yeah,
time.
and there's been a couple of years that was on there, because I
Right.
was tracking back, looking at something, and it
Right.
seems like there was 4 or 5 years. And I didn't track back to see if they were
It's
passed.
further back than
Yeah.
that, yeah.
it was set up as an expendable trust. And it's for facilities, so. And the minutes that I have, I think, are from 1994.
Expendable
Oh,
trust.
that's
a little
probably about
different.
right, yeah.
Oh, yeah, we looked at those.
Yeah.
So, we're still trying to work out exactly how to package this to make it, because the DRA has a problem with it. They're like, we'll work with you, you have to have this, have to have trustees in control of this by the end of the year. I don't think using the funds are gonna be a problem, but the school board can't just, apparently the school board can't just elect to use them. Or us for that matter, so.
That's interesting.
Wasn't that what it was set aside for?
Yeah,
That was the intent, yeah.
Yeah, and usually, in normal practice, we go to the trustees, and then if the board wanted to spend the money, you'd make a motion at your meeting to, direct us to request money from the trustees, and you give the trustees then your minutes from the meeting that show that it was warranted, then you give them whatever documentation that you've spent that money in the appropriate way, and they write you a check.
Yeah, I'm looking right at the minutes right now, and it's the district voted to create an expendable general fund under the provisions of RSA 198-20-C to be known as the School Buildings Maintenance Fund for the purpose of repairing and maintaining the school buildings. Furthermore, to name the Newfound Area School Board as agents, which you had mentioned earlier, to expend the principal and interest of said trust fund, and to raise and appropriate this sum of $30,000 at that time to be added to the expendable school district trust fund building maintenance. So it's just odd, in talking to them, it looked like this should be a reserve where the school board would have the ability to vote, but I'm not as familiar with the setup of SB2 towns, and they gave me a lot of reasons why we needed to have a municipality in charge of the trust, not the school.
Is that because we're SB2?
I think so.
Maybe we weren't in '94? When did we become
It's,
SB2?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good question.
I
I
think
don't know.
perhaps we weren't then.
It's very possible, which is why this situation would exist right now.
So
Yeah.
how was this
Yeah.
uncovered? Because I think we've spent this money in the past very easily just by authorizing the expenditure.
Because the funds, how you deal with these funds are, it was put into the MS-25, which is a statement it's a summarized version of the revenue portions of the DOE 25. And this showed up as not as a transfer to the trust, but it stayed in with fund balance building within the general fund. They noticed that and said that can't be. And then there was a transfer to by board vote of $60,000, and actually in the financials it was listed as $120,034, which is exactly what was transferred into it from last year, plus $34 of accrued interest. So the DRA noticed that, and they say you can't do that. The minutes from the vote, which they have, and I believe Dan was working with them to solve this problem before he left, shows that was, you actually only voted in 2013 to transfer exactly $60,000 into this trust. And when you look in the financials, there's no trust to transfer into, and there is no transfer. So that's what they're questioning. And I believe it was handled in a similar fashion last year. So I think they caught that last year, and they were working with Dan to fix it going forward.
And when you say that they need trustees by the end of the year, the end of the fiscal year or the end of the
I believe the
calendar?
end of the fiscal year,
Okay.
which is what the city operates on as well.
Where's the 60,000 at this stage?
It's in the bank, and it's in this fund.
In that fund?
If you,
Because
I
I
mean,
know
in
how
all
it was-
reality, this
was-
is kind of a semantic.
Yeah, it was presented to the
That's
voters
what-
as an emergency.
I'm just
situation.
curious why they caught it this past year and not several years ago, when we've been doing this for years.
Oh, I believe it's been listed as a trust, though, in your financials for those years, and Dan brought it in similar to a capital reserve and did not do that transfer. So for whatever reason, I think he was accounting for it as a capital, similar to a capital reserve within the general fund. But in reality, it's not in the general fund at all. And one of my pet peeves is it's also not in the financials. It has its own specific ledger. So I'm bringing all these funds into your financial package, and from everything from activity funds to funds like this, so that we can report on them all within the same, it's like having Quicken at home, and then for your shopping, you keep it separate, and for this, you do this separately. You wouldn't do that. So we don't want to do that here either. And we'll clean it up, and I'm going to work with the Department of Revenue to get more clarity on how this works. Dan, I'm also going to be speaking with Dan too. He had already got, this ball has been rolling for a few months before he got here, so.
And isn't it the same as the scholarships? Don't those have to have a trustee?
I think those are.
Trustees?
Those are.
So, and for some reason, I have in my mind that they told us it had to be Bristol, and I think it was because the SAU office is located in Bristol. It has to be, but.
I don't know, because what would you do if Bristol voted not to accept this?
Yeah.
So I'm sure they would accept another
I-
municipality.
Control of the district funds.
I'm questioning why one of the 7 towns would have authority over this.
Right.
We are a separate political subdivision.
Because I
We
think
have-
it has to sit with the trustees as opposed to just the school board, and the school board doesn't have trustees. I know
That
every
doesn't-
district I've worked in, that's how it
Okay,
has
that-
always sat with the town.
Hold on
and-
a second, though. That doesn't mean that we couldn't ask the voters to name the board as trustees, which it sounds like, based on what I'm hearing, was the mistake in the warrant.
I don't know.
It's
Every
very
year for the
possible.
past several years. But it doesn't sound right that a town, Hebron, Bridgewater, Bristol, pick one, Groton, gets to be the authority of the trust funds for a separate political subdivision, which is the school district. That I'd want to investigate.
Yeah,
I
I'm
can't-
inclined to
yeah.
agree with that. I would think that either the school board or the budget committee should be named as trustees,
Yeah.
rather than an individual community within the,
Or separate
In
trustees.
spite of what whomever it was that you're speaking with, the DRA may have told you, I think we want to be careful on that one.
I will certainly, I'm working on this now. So
Okay.
it just came kind of to light, so I wish I had a little bit more detail on what and why. So I'm working on that as we speak. It came to light in the middle of last week when they pretty much gave me back the DOE 25. So I was like, oh, wait, what? Oh, this is perfect document. I'm sure it's, so we've been working on that, and we've also sent it back to our auditors too. So we came up with the right entries, and I say we, our accountant Karen Colby. I worked with her on it, and we sent it to our auditors. They reviewed it and looked at how the transfers, and it has a lot to do with fund balance, work out in the financials. So being not the person that created those documents, I'm still, I'm going through it. The DOE 25 is a pretty lengthy document, and I really can't talk to it in much more detail right now, but we did do the correcting entries that I believe will satisfy the DRA for the reporting. What's not going to satisfy them is not having trustees yet. So I'll get more clarity on that over the next couple of weeks.
I have a memo from, coincidentally, our district attorney, Sol Kidder, Leslie Saywood and Loman, and it's by Gordon Graham, whom we've worked with quite a bit. And it outlines some of this information I should probably just give to you, share with you as well. He does say, for example, capital reserve funds and trust funds non-lapsing and special by nature. That's a segment in his report. And he talks
That's
about
definitely true.
there are differences between capital reserve funds and expendable trust funds. There are small but important differences. So it talks about being broad when you name the purpose of the fund so that you can have some flexibility there, that sort of thing. But I'll give this to you so you can review it as well. Maybe it'll help. Okay, back to the baseline question. So there is the 60,000, which is $120,034, all right? And the 350 in reserve. Question of how to get to it if we need to remains open. And that may have something to do with the oil tank that we're talking about, maybe having to do something about here at the high school, right?
This is the elementary school.
There's two
Thanks.
tanks that we're working on. One doesn't specifically have to be replaced, the other one is at the end of its life. And it's also presented a couple leaks that are contained. The sump pumps on both need to be replaced, and it's recommended while you're doing these replacements to meet the regulations that you replace the whole entire tank. So it's the middle school and the Bristol Elementary School.
Well, it's not the high school.
No, I believe that one is all set.
Is, Stacy, is the SRO still in here?
Yes,
That's what I was looking for. What's it under?
it's,
That's right,
Say that
21,
again?
49, and I believe it's under 3.
Other psych services, 72,500.
Yes, because
Yep.
it's not a payroll position, so you won't see it under 100s. It's considered a contracted service.
Was completed in '89.
Question?
The high school was completed in
This from,
'89, so that would give us an idea.
it says it's the high school.
We were a district then, in '89.
I can't actually.
Yeah, it's been 50 years this year.
The district.
Yeah.
The district was the 60s.
Yeah.
And have you got feedback from the public on the SRO position? Because I don't know that there's much public support for this
I have heard
district.
nothing.
Nothing? Okay.
Well, it's only been mentioned at
Budget committee?
Budget Committee
Yeah.
so far.
I will add what is not in this budget, obviously teacher's contract, or increases for anybody. So, I do have some numbers of what that looks like, so that's one of the things the board will need to direct us or help us identify what you want you put in there. And we kind of broke it out into 3 categories as administrators, support staff, and specialists, the program specialists. So just to give you an idea, including benefits, so that retirement and Medicaid increases, a 1% increase for administrators is $9,330. So Mike has the spreadsheet, we can add more if you want different numbers. A 1% increase for all support staff is $33,238. And a 1% increase for our support specialists is $6,652. That kind of gives you an idea of where those fall.
Question. On your 2320 superintendent, 90,295, is that for the curriculum position? Curriculum administrator?
Yes, the increase would be that.
Okay, what
Oh,
day?
actually, the increase is the health, is that, the increases there are the health insurance lines.
Yeah, more specific.
Yeah. It is probably, my guess is.
Well, it
it's
was
a
90,
combination.
now it's 110, 513.
Yeah,
It's a combination of health insurance, so just on, it's almost a 10% increase on just the insurance packages. So if the main, under 2320 also holds, that's myself, Mrs. Holton, and Stacy, the superintendent, and the curriculum position combined.
Curriculum
So it
position's in there.
Yeah, so
includes
it's in
all
there.
those.
And
So
does that position give 26,000 benefit package too?
it's the same.
it does, and actually the total compensation package is around 31,000.
Not that much
for-
now, is it?
That's the yeah, it includes the comp 300 plus $5,000, and then the administrator pays, I believe, 12% of that.
Yeah.
How's that gonna go with the Obama Cadillac plan?
Well,
Huh? We're gonna
It's,
stuck with
yeah,
something
it's
there?
gonna affect everybody, because we have the same plan as everybody. It's not what you contribute, it's the
I don't
cost
know
of the
I don't
plan.
know
that's
anything
what it's
about this.
based
So-
off of. So, for example, that includes dental, so you could spend that in a number of ways. Dental, long-term disability, flex spending, health insurance, and a tax sheltered annuity. So, based on whatever these people's spouses take, they can have a combination of those programs.
So they're getting a $5,000 raise right there,
Uh,
benefit package alone.
I think it's actually,
31, there was
it
26.
was $28,300 in 2014, so it's 31,000. It's around a $3,000 increase in the compensation of that.
Can you explain to me how these columns are working here, just so I understand what we're looking at? Budget for 13 and actual, pretty clear. 14 budget, is 14 actual historical to date?
That is what is both spent and encumbered to date. So one of the things we're looking to do too is, as I'm working with our accounts payable bookkeeper to go through items, so not everything in this area is paid through a purchase order. I think things like transportation should be encumbered through a purchase order, so as that gets changed throughout the year, those purchase orders should be revised. It's just like having your cable bill. I know what those payments are, so I should have one purchase order encumbering that for the whole year. So one of the things that we're working on is getting those items fully encumbered, so that when we present a monthly report, I can actually show you the actual expenditures, not just the budget. Those expenditures should also include the encumbrances, which gives you a good idea where you stand on certain items. It gives
But
me a
not in
better-
the same number.
I can break those out into different columns, but we don't encumber something unless it has essentially been contracted to purchase. So for accounting purposes, that's spent, unless something happens to revise that. So if there was, for example, a tuition contract. Well, I'm not gonna leave that tuition contract encumbering money if there is a change in that student's circumstances. So then I would ask the administrator to revise that. It gives us a much better picture on the budget in real time. So this
Well, the reason I have the question is under FY proposed, you show a dollar difference of, right on the first line, regular education programs. A dollar difference of negative 279,682.
that difference is between the two budgets, not the actuals. And
So,
I can change these columns around if that seems a little bit confusing. So I understand what you're saying.
it's between these two.
I would
I'm
not
sorry.
compare the 2015 budget with what has been spent this year. It's what's been budgeted. So we've added that column one for us when we're reviewing the budget. We want to look at what's actually being spent on these items, specifically transportation. Another thing that we've looked at is we can pull out of the software 7 years of history on most of these lines. So trying to get a more accurate picture of why we're budgeting for some of these things the way we are.
Okay, but back to the FY14 actual.
Yes.
That's what we spent historical to date plus encumbrances,
Yes.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Which means it could be higher than whatever the grand total is, and it certainly is likely to be, because we budgeted.
The grand total
Right.
for that column, will definitely be higher than that.
Yeah,
Because we're trying to get it so it's very close to being that, with the exception usually of your supply accounts.
close to being what?
As close to, so when we look at the bottom line especially for things like facilities maintenance and those kinds of contracts, when I look at that end of the year number for column FY14 actual, so when I go to the last page of the document, it says that we've actually encumbered and spent $17.6 million.
Right.
Right? Now, I know that we still have about $3 million there. I have to ask myself, where is that? Right, so one of the things that we do, this gives me a good idea, that our repairs, you don't encumber all your repairs. Supplies, we don't encumber all those supplies. But I have certain lines that if I'm saving money on certain contracts and I'm revising POs, I don't really care what they budgeted for. We're not gonna spend that money, and then we can bring that to the board to make some better decisions.
Okay,
So
so I'm just
the
trying to
actual-
understand the layout, because this is
Correct.
very different
Yep.
than what we've seen in the past.
Absolutely.
So, and understandably so, because it's software-based now, not
Correct.
spreadsheet-based,
Right.
so.
Yep.
And that's cool, we're just gonna have to get used to it.
And
You gotta help us along with that.
I plan on doing that. So I've had a few phone conversations with some of you. And if you want different columns in here, or you're saying, you know what, Mike, that column's confusing. I don't want to see what's actually spent. Save that for your expense reports. I have no problem pulling those out as well.
I like it.
Yeah, I think it's
easy.
very transparent. It shows exactly what's going on. The forms are dated as of when you printed them, so you know exactly what happened when I ran it. And everything that's on these reports, ties to exactly what's going on, so I can also speak to it in detail, which I can't do so well on a spreadsheet.
Okay, so since you brought it up,
Sure.
transportation,
Yes.
okay? The dollar difference here, that's between the two budgets, not between what we've spent and,
Can you refer me to a line item, please? Page and line?
2721 on page 2 of
Right.
the first.
So the difference is between the actual budget in 14 and the proposed budget.
So you have I have two FY14 columns.
Right,
The what I'm comparing the FY15 budget proposal with is the FY14 budget. So it's not the column directly next to it,
okay,
okay? That column though, directly next to it, the actuals, that's what we have spent and encumbered to date. So when you see that dollar difference, it's between the FY14 budget and what we're proposing for FY15.
Based on what you said earlier, though, that's a good example of why I don't understand why those numbers aren't the same, because it's contractual.
Well, not necessarily. So we had a 3% increase in that. And one of the other things we found too is, do you have a contract for in-district special ed transportation?
No.
No, you don't. You don't have a contract for out-of-district necessarily special ed transportation. However, much of this has been expended in your contracted transportation lines. This is regular ed, so there's other items in here as well. In some cases, we're working to reduce some of those items, so we looked at historical costs. Now, I've been going through the fuel costs with our payables person and looking and asking a lot of questions, because why are we charging certain costs to our contracted line? So I'm looking to possibly break some of these out.
okay. So based on what I'm seeing here, it would be a fair question to ask, given these numbers, are we likely to go over our transportation budget this year? I mean, can we project that out this early in the year?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can, actually.
Because your bus contract is I mean, we know how much we pay per bus, and we know how many buses we have, so that's an easy one. Special ed is where it's a little bit more varied, because if we may have a student who's out of district, who then comes back in district, so that may change. My guess is we have an encumbered special ed funds, that's why that's a little low. That's why it says we have 359,000 budgeted, but we've only spent 87,000. That's probably just what we spent in the first month of school or 2 months of school.
Yeah, but I'm looking at 27, 21 in-district.
Yeah, that's probably the easiest one to figure out, because we have a contract that has a bus cost to it.
So what makes up that line too is there's 26 accounts that actually are consolidated into that one line. And I'll give you an example of one, contracted transportation with just Bristol Hebron, Bridgewater Hebron, sorry. Right now, they're over, that's why I'm having our payroll AP bookkeeper go in and start encumbering these funds, because this wasn't adding quite up to, for what I was looking at, like, why are these being charged to this account? Now, I think in total, it looks like you're gonna have enough, because I see that they save money in some summer school transportation, and there's money that hasn't been charged to middle school transportation. But when I look at Bridgewater Hebron, they're already $30,000 over budget in that line. So within the 2,700 transportation lines for all the general fund, I believe you're gonna be fine, because I looked at the historical costs of other years, and it should work. However, as we start building, clearer budgets, I'd really like to get down to the margin of error on each account line, not just on the function lines. So I could give you a 100-page report of every account, and we should be able to say, well, the reason why there's 1,000 left in that account is because we didn't have as many runs on our summer transportation. We have the ability to get to that level of detail. It's just a matter of aligning our invoices to really match where we're expending the funds, and then budgeting exactly to that. So we're working on that.
So the $56,015 figure can be almost justified based on where we are right now with those numbers.
Right, and as a matter of fact, when I looked at all of transportation, and I should say all of the 27, 21, right now we're looking at possibly 45,000 left that hasn't, and that might get eaten up with fuel. So those are the things that we're able to look at, and that's why I've asked her to encumber all of our annual costs, including the ones that are predictable. So we looked at, if fuel, I know what it got budgeted for this for a reason, based on units used. So we should be able to say through the next months, review what was done in 2013 and beyond, and say, what are we looking at given the existing fuel prices? So why can't we encumber that for the whole year? And then revise it as prices change. That gives us a lot of good points to review.
So the 15 proposed budget is pretty tight.
It is, and I mean, the last week and a half, besides the DOE items and other things, it's a pretty tight budget, and we're slowly, there's still items in there that you'll notice are level funded, where it's justifiable, looking at the past history, that those are good numbers. We didn't pop increases in there either. So we think that the numbers being used are good. But as we go through it line by line, I'm trying to get a little bit more accuracy to those lines, which you've seen just in the last iteration of this budget to now.
I have two transportation questions. So below the transportation in district, the field trips were budgeted in 14 for 24,000, but in 15 they're budgeted 44,000. What's accounting for a $20,000 increase?
So when you budgeted for this year, Danbury was not going to have, there was a talk about Danbury closing at some point, and so they did not budget for field trips at all. And New Hampton was an error in their budgeting, and should have been $11,150 and was only budgeted at $1,150. So those are actually now this year budgeted at what the request from the principals was.
Okay, the second question is, under fiscal year 14 actual, we're spending $31,000 so far on food service operations. And there's nothing budgeted in 15, but aren't we now transporting food to 2 schools? So.
No, I'll answer that one too. This is, I believe this should come out of Fund 21. So I've noticed a couple things. In the last budget we presented, there was some health insurance as well that was charged from food services to the general fund. And that had to do with how one of the deductions was set up. And I've noticed that our accountant, Karen, she journal entries these back. So what you're seeing there, again, the nice thing about getting these reports that come out of the actual system is I would consider that a problem. I'm like, is this supposed to be budgeted? We do a transfer to that fund for this specifically. So should expenditures be coming out of the general fund for that? I'd argue no, but these are things that reports like this allow me to ask some questions about. So we're going through, again, everything from the usage of these vehicles, so sometimes it is, we do use their vehicle for that, but then again, should we charge the fuel to that line? No. So these are the things we're trying to fix, and that's, it's really nice that you saw that. And that is in the actual column, so that's how it's being spent, and you can see, is there any money budgeted for that?
Right.
No.
So
Clearly, it shouldn't be there.
So in the proposed, it's in one of the other lines?
Correct,
It's in the 21?
yes.
Okay.
And this fund, this is Fund 10, our general fund. Food services is in its own fund, as well as federal grants, and we have not presented any reports on those yet.
Okay.
So,
What's the difference on your transportation and district and student transportation?
I can
It's
do that specifically.
519 and... let's see.
Oh, okay, so now you're in the object code.
I just look at different...
Yeah, so you're on page 2 of the second report, which is
Yeah.
student transportation, and you're looking at comparing that.
To the one we just discussed.
Okay.
what are we talking about here?
That's December 9th.
2721 on page 2, and on page 2 of the last, page 2 was 519.
Okay.
So there's portions of 519 that's also in function code 2725. So that's not just in 2721 and 2722. So that object code is student transportation in its entirety for, so if I clear that.
Transportation is actually 2,270,000 or something like that.
Yeah, so you have some special ed transportation, you have some field trips, all those are coming in different functions, and in that, there's other breakouts. So let's look at all the, I can discuss the breakouts of object code 519.
It's voc ed, and
Correct,
special ed, and
It's gonna be
regular
all of the,
transportation.
correct.
so
There's
it's gonna be
pieces of it.
27, 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25, basically added together to give you that one line.
So there is some value to the summary of the object code, because that kind of defines the account. So it tells you the summary of all student transportation.
That's what that is, a summary of the others.
Yes.
Okay, I
So
didn't know
it's
it was added to it.
519 in all those different functions.
And now, this may sound stupid, I don't know.
No, that's
But
all
what
right.
about the fuel for these, is that in the contract price or is that separate?
Fuel's actually separate,
Yeah,
which is unique here. I've never seen that in a contract, so.
I didn't know if it was a contract, the whole thing covered the fuel and everything.
No, and that's interesting, because when you hear there's a 3% increase in just the contract itself, that's the contracted service from First Student, but we actually pay for the fuel separately, one to the Department of Transportation and the other to Irving Oil. So,
Do they have their own tanks up there at the bus stop or?
no,
No,
they
we
have
go-
to, they go, because we get a government rate.
To the exit.
No, that's really.
I don't know who's, because I seen school bus going down to the
Yeah.
town dump down there, and I think they're filling up, and I says, how is that working? We keep track of what they
Any of those.
needed or what?
They have a
Depart-
card.
Yeah, any of the DOT stops, they can fill up and they
Oh,
have
they
a
can.
card. Yes. And the idea behind that was, while a little bit more complicated, if in a contract, they're gonna just pass that cost back to us, right? So why don't we get a government rate and save some money? So instead of them increasing the contract for the cost of their fuel, we asked them to, looking back, this has been going on for a while, they asked them to pull the fuel out of the contract, and we'll pay for that off of a DOT card, similar to what you would do with an in-district transportation type situation where you own the whole program in-house.
Lloyd, if you look on the very last page, you'll see a line called under 626, that's called fuel, bus, and lunch van. I'm assuming that's the line, it's just about $185,000.
Wow. Fuel, bus, lunch, and
Yep.
van, I saw that. But
That's what that would
I
be.
didn't, yeah, bus, lunch, and van, I figured it was something to do with meal, like, that's expensive meal. I didn't know if that was included, the buses for everyday
Yeah.
routes too, it is. I saw that, but I didn't think it was for that. That was kind of expensive, I'm paying to have lunches around.
Yeah,
I just wanna lose on that
could
one.
build a new kitchen for that.
Stacy, can you help me with, on page 1, report 2? Right at the top, looking at regular education programs and special programs, summer extension program, enrichment programs. The dollar difference is shown from the proposed budget versus our current budget on line 1 at 1,100 account, 279,000 less.
Yep,
And then 290,000 less in special programs for the proposed FY15 budget. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay. And then enrichment's down as well. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because those are the big numbers in
Yeah.
this budget.
So enrichment is down because that's where some of the summer programs were taken out of before, so we've just realigned that one. The other two are down because of some of the reductions that we made. So we have cut, I think we're now at 20 paraeducators maybe. I have to look at the number. But, so we added another one from what we talked about at the last meeting. We also, we with the 4 retirements, we also realigned those salary and benefits. So if they were, for example, I have an elementary ed teacher who is retiring, who's at the top of the step. I think she was like a bachelor's plus 15 or master's at the top. So we reduced that back down to a bachelor step 1 because at an elementary ed position, we can probably hire somebody pretty qualified. So there were some significant savings in those lines when we reduced those.
So that's all calculated in the negative 279
Correct,
and
and the
290.
290, correct.
As well as the removal of contingencies.
Yes.
Okay, but to stay on personnel for a moment, how is it that, and I'm asking this hopefully knowing the answer, but tell me for the record, how is it that with those significant reductions to the tune of almost $600,000 that the budget is just a few $1,000s under what it was in 14? What we budgeted for in 14? Because I don't see exactly where those numbers go up that significantly.
I didn't see it either, but I took my little calculator and I added
It's-
the minus.
Yeah,
it's
and then I
there.
added the pluses, and I said, yeah.
It does,
this is
so you
correct.
have 2 big numbers, but then if you look down, you have an increase of 41,000, 29,000,
110
72,000, 46,000, 93,000.
But the trade-off in personnel, we're going to hire some special ed teachers, for example.
Correct, correct.
So where will that show up?
Those would show up in the regular ed, or actually in the 1,200 line in the special ed programs as
They've already been
increases.
added
But the
They've been
overall,
added.
yep,
But it's still,
but it's still a decrease
Yeah,
overall.
okay, nets
Yep,
out
because
as
I
a
told,
decrease.
basically, I told the administrators for every 4 paraeducators, you could trade them in for a teacher. So if they were 4 expensive paraeducators or who took family benefits,
Mm-hmm.
and we put it in as a cheaper, you know what I mean, as a lower, I think we budgeted the special ed teachers at a master step 5. Knowing the role we wanted them to go into, we wanted somebody with a little bit of experience. And so there could have been significant savings overall. It's hard, it's hard to tell because you randomly, you're choosing, I was just adding up, 14.2.
And I think, and the cuts don't always equal a trade-in.
right.
Sometimes there were just cuts being made because we could make cuts without
That's right.
impacting student programming.
okay, you have me at a bit of a disadvantage here without my computer, but to do this easily, but I'm looking at all of the increased numbers in the budget. We talked about transportation. Only a couple pages here, so it's not too bad. So the transfer other agencies is 116,000. Did we talk about that? Is that
That's the health insurance
health
money that you
benefit,
received.
right?
Yeah, I would not have put a number in that. So, what's not reflected in here too, and I would like to put it in to the next iteration of the budget, would be the premium holiday of about $126,000. So that's not reflected in here. It is reflected though in the 14 budget of $116,000, which you've spoken to. So I would not consider this a transfer between agencies. I would consider this an expense reimbursement, and I would ask the Health Trust to actually not cut us a check, but return this through our invoices next year. So for budgeting, I would take that money and reduce our health insurance lines appropriately. They will be sending us a spreadsheet shortly, which has the breakout by employee, including retirees, for what exactly makes up that whole dollar figure.
Okay.
So I was able to speak to it a little bit tonight, because I met with them to also talk about one of their possible programs with a health savings account. So
Okay.
I think that will be helpful as well, and you should be able to count that towards an expense reduction.
All right. Let's go through a few of these that, if we could, just to clarify. And I want to ask if you can point out which one of these will show the 9% healthcare increase.
That would be on the,
211?
page 1 of the 4 budget report by object. A little bit lower under health insurance. It's an overall increase of $291,000.
Page one.
Okay, what does that roll up to on the number 2 report?
It's actually broken out across multiple functions, because that object code, 211, is found in special ed, it's found in regular programs, it's found even in facilities and so on. Any group of function that has, I actually presented Stacy with a report today that also kind of summarizes the object codes with each function. So I think that might be a helpful report to, it's not as lengthy as a full accounting of the budget, but I think it would kind of give you the object breakdown by what are all wages, all hundreds, what are all benefits, all 200s for each function. So this is still nice to see a summary for each object, because it gives you an idea what is the total health insurance cost for the district. And you can see that's going to be, so it's not a perfect 9.6%. It's I think just over 10%, right? So that increase also has accounts for some people changing plans. It also accounts for new positions when we know we have to. When we budget for a position, we don't just budget for the base salary, right? We want to budget for the Medicare, Social Security, retirement, and possible health benefits that could be taken from that position. So we're not blindsided. So that's what you're going to see in there as well.
Okay. The next one I wanted to ask about was the computer-aided instruction.
First page, last item.
Yeah, that's basically your technology plan increase.
So I think in total, there's about $25,000 worth of increases. I've spoken, we had a meeting this morning